we say a splendid good morning to those of you listening to Classic Radio 105.5, 105.9 on the FM dial. Those of you viewing GBN TV, whether it's Channel 7, Channel 11, Channel 20, good morning. Welcome. It's Friday, the 8th day of November 2024. And it's to the point. I'm your host, GT. I'll be with you until it's 10 a.m. this morning. And we do have, of course, a guest in studio. We should be having double guests this morning, but we have one gentleman with us this morning. Let me say good morning to Mr. David Ned. He said you could call him Dave. Folks will of course know who he is once any one of the names you mentioned. Good morning to you, sir, and welcome to the program this morning.
Good morning to you, GT, and good morning to the listening public. And I'm Dave Ned. I am a member of the Independent Caucus for Constitution Reform, and we just want to say thank you so much for allowing us to give our views on this process of national interest that has generated so much discussions and there's so much interest in.
All right. So, you started off saying which of the organizations you are part of, the Independent Caucus for Constitution Reform. Tell us a wee bit about the organization, the reason for the formation. Of course, it's kind of broad-based understanding the reason for the formation already. But maybe you could probably offer more insight and more detail for reason of wanting to do this, be part of this, and starting this particular organization.
So most of us would remember that we took part in two constitutional referendums around 2016 and 2018.
Yes.
We were involved, not as a caucus then, but as members of civil society. And coming out of those interactions, the consultations, the educational fora, all the interactions that we had, we found that there was a lack of education on the contents of the Constitution. Further to that, there was in effect also a lack of education around what was being referred to the people. So because the people did not understand the provisions of the Constitution, they could not really relate to the proposed changes. There was a few of us who, we kept meeting each other at all the different forums, and that was in excess for the Independent Caucus for Constitution Reform.
Yes.
And the mandate was that we should try to provide education around the Constitution so that we can facilitate proper reform. We have to remember our democracy is premised on the assumption that we have an educated and engaged population. With respect to the Constitution, sadly, that is not, that is not reflected in the realities today. Mm-hmm. And you hear a lot of Americans speak about their Constitution. They know the Constitution. They can speak to their constitutional rights. In Grenada, it's different. And we undertook then in 2017 to form this group, and that the group would bring people together in a non-partisan way to discuss the affairs of the nation and their affairs, the people's affairs.
So if I could ask a question, the membership, how the structure and membership of your organization?
Okay. So we have a loose membership. We hold meetings. We hold discussions every Monday. So every Monday we have a meeting. Okay. It starts at 7 in the evening, and it goes until 11:30 at night. All right. There's a lot of we have around 15. It goes up to 20, 25 people, but there's some.
It varies.
It varies depending on the topic that we discuss. But and then we would disseminate information periodically. So we go to schools. We've been to engage TAMCC. We engage young people, and have discussions centered around the Constitution and grounding them in what the fundamental rights and freedoms are.
All right. You mentioned something earlier in your opening statements, understanding the importance of understanding the Constitution. How important it is for Grenadians in general to understand the Constitution? and getting the relative information of it that would leave you to understand what the Constitution really means. We always hear Constitution and Constitution. I myself hear in Constitution. There's lots of Grenadians out there. All we hear, well, we have a Constitution, but we don't understand what it really meant to us as a people. Would you agree with that? And in terms of the understanding part of it.
Well, for you to understand the Constitution, first and foremost, you must be aware.
Reading about the Constitution.
You have to read about it. The Constitution are the fundamental rules that governs the relationship with the people of Grenada and those that they select into office. Yeah. So it sets the parameters, it sets the ground rules, and it sets the engagement, the terms and the conditions for the engagement. So the Constitution, for instance, sets up the public service. The Constitution, for instance, sets up pension, which is what we're going to speak about. So if you don't know the fundamental directives that contribute to the setting up of these entities, these constitutional entities, then a lot of decisions are made on the fly, not knowing of the rationale and for various provisions in the Constitution. So you get decisions that do not necessarily reflect what the Constitution, the intent of the Constitution was. Yes. And we have to accept that transparency, accountability is necessary in every developing nation. The Constitution sets up that whole mechanism for transparency and accountability.
Now, the average Grenadian, maybe hear you speaking about this right now. How do they fit into the Constitution of Grenada in terms of listening to the politicians and so forth that speaks of it and say, well, this is done true in the Constitution? And you did made a statement a while ago that says that, we will never know if the legality of what is taking place if it's done through the Constitution or not. And you said all you have, a regular Grenadian individual who was listening, all you have to do is, of course, learn about, or should I say not learn, but read and understand what the Constitution is. And sometimes the terminology and so forth that are used is not always what that regular individual may understand. In terms of the structuring and the writing and so forth of the Constitution. So it always leaves a baffle that folks tend to not want to lay their interest in it, if you understand where I'm coming from. So would you advise that regular individual out there get themselves a copy and sit, read, and try to understand?
The Constitution directs your every action. So, for instance, your actions with the police, your actions with a public servant. If you go to the public of the ministry, for instance, you're not satisfied with the service that you got, what do you do? So if you're not aware of these things,
you would not understand what
you don't understand your rights. Okay, and in terms of the language, you mentioned the language, and that's a popular misconception because the Constitution is couched in language every day. No person shall, no person shall be deprived of. Simple. It takes a full understanding, a rounded understanding of the Constitution. A lot of us, we go to sections of the Constitution and try to correct ills. And what we found is that if you are not aware of the Constitution in its entirety, then the understanding that you have becomes limited. Because it is like a system, it's like a domino. And if you remove one brick from that domino, everything comes down. And saying that it brings us to, again, the whole concept of reform, and that we must take reform. You cannot cherry pick items to reform out of the Constitution. It has to be inculcated into
All aspects.
All aspects of it.
All right. So of course, Ned, we drew for a break. Let's take it. And when we come back, we're going to get into the discussion that we hopefully get into. We're talking pension reform this morning. And so that should be interesting for there's a lot of folks who would like to chime in as we go along this morning. There are listeners of viewers who like to chime in. We'll also offer that opportunity to them as we go along this morning. Stay with us, folks. To the point here, Classic Radio, GBN TV. We check that break. When we come back, we continue with our conversation. Don't touch it down.
Tourism generates revenue and foreign exchange earnings.
Did you know it stimulates infrastructural development and facilitates cultural exchange among people?
You must know tourism is linked to all industries,
from agriculture to construction.
So support the industry today and be welcoming to all our visitors.
Tourism is my business. Tourism is your business. Tourism is our business. Listen one and all. Tourism connects us all.
A message from the Ministry of Tourism
and the Grenada Tourism Authority.
Grenada, get ready to celebrate the magic of the season with Christmas with GBN. Starting November 4th, join us weekdays from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on GBN Television, K105 and Hot 98. Monday kicks off with traditional stories and wellness, featuring a storytelling session with Labukan Creative Center, giveaways, nutrition tips, and live calls to share your holiday wishes. On Tuesday, brings Craft Day with live and pre-recorded workshops guided by local artisans. Join us for more giveaways and connect through live calls. Wednesday features an outdoor production showcase, giving local sponsors the chance to shine from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. On Thursday, it highlights a local cuisine showcase at True Blueberry Resort. And on Friday, it wraps up the week with live entertainment in our studio, showcasing local artists.
Welcome back to our listeners. Welcome back to our viewers this morning. Welcome back, of course, Mr. David Ned with us this morning. And we're speaking pension this morning. How I just generalized pension that in general this morning. We want to go along the line of, pension. The importance of it. There are a lot of folks out there have always heard about pension. We heard of the administration stepped in, pension was key, and all of that. I'm just centralizing the whole conversation around. There are folks who at least as the pension stands now, there are folks who propose to come also there and contribute who is there now, who is non-contributing part of the pension. Let's talk pension to start the conversation. For those who are listening,
What if you had a choice? A choice of joining a line or a choice of making your purchases online? What would you choose? While you ponder on that, the National Lotteries Authority has provided another purchasing option. All their games are now available online.
So
yes, Grenadians.
public service?
From wherever you are, purchase your favorite daily and jackpot-type games using any electronic device. Register on the NLA's website at www.nla.gd. Top up your account and enjoy online lottery gaming at your convenience. We're taking shopping comfort up, several notches. But the choice is yours. Join a line or buy online. NLA, make your dreams come true.
Now we have to look at the various categories of workers that you have in the public.
And for some reason that has just been taken care of. So let's start this whole process over again. I'm not sure what really had caused that. Of course, our apology for that. I'm not sure what would cause that. But so we back live. Let's roll in terms of our and of course our second guest has joined us. We of course introduce us shortly as we move along. So we started off talking in terms of the pension. And you was giving, of course, an explanation in terms of the different types of pension and so forth. If you maybe could start over and re-emphasize on that a wee bit.
So, pensions are in the public service, you have pensions. In the private sector, you have pensions. Most private sector public pension schemes are contributory.
Yes.
So, you work with a firm. You have a contract with the firm. As part of the contract, the firm tells you that you contribute X percent, they contribute Y percent. You pool that together. At the end of your tenure, you get a pension. In the public sector, pensions are non-contributory. The pension as defined in the 1973 Constitution is non-contributory, meaning that the worker does not make a contribution to the pension, but that pension is solely the responsibility of the government, the employment entity. In the government now, we have various categories of workers in the public service.
Yes.
And not all qualify for pensions according to the Constitution. So the Constitution differentiates between an established worker who is appointed to an established post. He gets a non-contributory pension at the end of his successful tenure. It specifies the tenureship, and what is important is that pension is not a right. So
when you say pension is not a right,
it's not a right. In the public service, the pension is not a right. It's an entitlement.
Yes.
And the fundamental difference is that for you to be entitled to something, you must first qualify.
Okay.
So, and that applies to the pension. For you to get your pension, you must successfully complete your tenure with government, i.e., there must be no discrepancies with regards to fraud, misconduct, etc., etc. And the entities that are established in the Constitution, the Public Service Commission, who has sole authority over the administration of the public service, of the workers in the public service. That entity has the authority to lessen your pension depending on whatever actions you took, or to remove your pensions altogether. So it's not a right. You don't automatically get your pension.
Okay.
And that gives the Public Service Commission and the people of Grenada the comfort that there is some mechanism that keeps the public servant accountable.
Yeah.
Now, that has not been spoken about in all of the discussions that we've been having, because pension is in fact an accountability mechanism. It is what keeps the public servant, the clerk in the ministry, the chief technical officer, the permanent secretary. They are all established posts. They all get a pension, and that is what keeps them accountable. Separate and distinct to the non-established workers. Non-established workers don't get a pension. They have a contract with government, and the contract is limited to 2 years.
Yes.
So after 2 years, a decision should have been made as to if you are now appointed to the established post, or that your contract ends.
That ends.
We have a situation in government now where the established government workers is about 4,000 plus workers, but we also have a situation where we have almost 3,500 non-established workers, and the word contract is used loosely. Yes. Even though we have some of those workers that have been employed in excess of the 2 years as stipulated in the public service rules and regulations. So when we talk about regularization, and we've heard the term used that we are regularizing before pensions, and the question begs, what is in fact regularization? What are we regularizing? Because if we are regularizing 3,500 workers who are outside of the established protocols, if we are regularizing that, then there has to be a conversation around the constitutional implications for the public service.
Okay.
Right? There has to be a conversation, and that conversation is a national one. It is just not the entities that are closely associated. And the whole scheme of pension brings to bear, there is the 1958 Pension Act, which is the primary legislation. Then there is the Constitution of Grenada. There is the establishment of the Public Service Commission, and you have the rules and regulations now that operate to guide the contract between government workers. So when you speak about regularization, it is important for us to understand what does regularization mean in the context of the public service. Are we making the 3,500 people established workers? Or are we regularizing them outside of that establishment that's required in the rules and regulations of the public service?
Or are we making them a totally separate entity?
And that we have two parallel public service working together.
All right.
And that is important because as part of the public service rules and regulations, there's a section that speaks to what is a department of government. So you understand that you have a ministry, and the ministry has various departments. You have the Inland Revenue Department, you have the Valuations Department, you have all of those different departments. And the definition for a department is something that operates outside of the control of the executive, or of the cabinet. It operates outside of the control of the minister. The minister does not control the operations in the department of government.
Okay. I'm getting it.
So that goes out, and but if you go to the Public Service Rules and Regulations, the Public Service Commission Rules and Regulations, there is a ministry. The minister has general charge over the ministry. There's a permanent secretary who is the day-to-day supervisor, right? And then now you have these various departments. But the Constitution is founded on the separation of powers. And the executive power, the authority of the executive, the authority of the legislature, the authority of the judiciary, those are the three fundamental pillars that separates functions of government. The legislature creates law, the executive executes the law, the judiciary interprets the law. And they're not supposed to interfere in the actions
of each other.
They're independent.
Right.
And that is transported into now the whole concept of running of the ministries. And so the minister has general charge. He's the minister. He's in charge of the policy directives. But the actual implementation is left to the departments. But the minister does not control the departments.
Okay.
And the situation with having a public service of established workers with 4,000 members and a public service of non-established workers with 3,500 workers brings that to the fore. Because the minister does not control the 4,000 workers, but because these 3,500 are on a contract, it is not clear the influence that the minister will now have on these workers.
All right. Let me take a time and introduce our guest. That's, of course, that's Miss Cassandra Mitchell. Let me say good morning to Miss Mitchell and welcome to the program. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm good, and apologies for being late. It's just one of those mornings.
I understand, certainly do understand. So how are you this morning? How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that we're having this conversation this morning around pension. I don't think there's more I can add to what Mr. Ned is saying, outside of the fact that any discussion around pensions have to be founded on our constitutional provisions and directives.
All right. And tell us a wee bit about your role being part of the Independence Caucus for the Constitution Reform. Tell us a wee bit about your role.
Well, I am currently the Secretary and the Treasurer attached to the Independent Caucus for Constitution Reform, and one of the youngest members, and the founding members, actually. We came together, I don't know if Mr. Ned mentioned it, post-referenda, when we looked at the results of the referenda held in Grenada and some of the concerns that some of the observer groupings documented, including one of the facts that a lot of people who got involved in the referenda, generally citizens, were not familiar with the constitutional provisions. And there was a general perception that the referenda had political agenda. So we came together as citizens and we decided that, you know what? At the end of the day, the ultimate power belongs in the hands of citizens. And if we are to make any changes around constitution reform, we have to be first informed what the Constitution says. And as a people, maybe make recommendations and suggestions on what we, the people, believe needs to be reformed.
Okay, great. We due for a break. Let's take it. And when we come back, we delve much more into the conversation here, folks. Stay with us. It's Classic Radio, GBN TV. We'll be right back after the break, folks. Don't touch your dial. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Batiste from GBN News. Season's greetings, everyone. Wishing you the very best for the holiday season. Spend time with each other. Be good to each other and celebrate each other. Looking ahead to 2025, my wish is for love, joy, and peace to reign in your life. Go forth, do more, and be more. You are loved.
I tell people nurses are not just nurses in the region. We really do owe them.
Welcome back once again to our listeners. Welcome back to our viewers. To the point for today, Friday, the 8th day of November. Welcome back to my guests, of course, Mrs. Mitchell and, of course, Mr. Ned with us this morning here. And we're talking, of course, pension reform. And we're speaking a whole lot about that this morning. Once again, Ms. Mitchell, my next question I want to direct to you. There's always that conversation where we hear entities are involved in the conversation of pension and so forth. Who are those entities that we should say that, the authority should be talking to in terms of, when you want to talk about pension reform and so forth? We hear of different entities have been invited to the conversation. Who really is those entities that should really be involved in when we have a conversation in terms of reforming pensions and so forth? If I can hear that from you.
Thank you for the question, and it's interesting that you're asking that, because one of the things that we notice in the discussions around pension reform is that the discussions seem to be coming from a top-down instead of a bottom-up approach. Our Constitution in Section 92, 93, and 94, in referring to pensions and issues around pensions, speaks a lot about the Public Service Commission. I've tuned into a number of the public debates around the issue, and I heard the acting permanent secretary make reference to we made suggestions to government, and the question that we're asking as citizens, who is we? Because the Constitution in sections 93 says that any discussions around pensions, whether it is to be reduced, withheld, must be with the permission of the Public Service Commission. We have heard a lot that this is not for established workers. I want to refer citizens to sections 93(2), where it says, where the amount of any pension benefits that may be granted to any person is not fixed by law, the amount of the benefits to be granted to him or her shall be the greatest amount for which he or her is eligible unless the Public Service Commission concurs in him or her being granted benefits of a smaller amount. Again, reference to the Public Service Commission. We have heard pronouncements that there aren't any laws outside of the 1958 Pension Act, which addresses established workers, that there are no laws which speaks to pensions for non-established workers. But again, the Constitution addresses it. And we are not hearing much about the constitutional directives as it relates to pensions and pension benefits. We have also heard the acting permanent secretary make reference to the fact, and we heard some concerns coming from the unions, that an email was submitted to the Grenada Trade Union Council. It is of interest that the Constitution, in speaking to the negotiating bodies, has enshrined the Grenada Union of Teachers as one of the negotiating body, and the Public Workers Union, which is the union which represents, obviously, public workers. The Constitution does not recognize the Grenada Trade Union Council. So the reference to quote-unquote internal politics of the unions is not something that we accept or we buy into, because we recognize the constitutional bodies. Of course, stakeholders have to be involved, because at the end of the day, pensions come from the public purse, the consolidated fund. So if you are to talk about pensions and pension reform, there must be contribution from the ordinary tax-paying citizens, because at the end of the day, it is the people's purse that are going to be drawn down and used for paying pensions to public officers. So it is important to hear feedback from us, ordinary citizens in Grenada, in relation to pension reform and what direction or what model we want to see in the future. So I've heard that there have been over 40 plus engagements, but I think it's very important to bring into the discussions and at the table the constitutionally enshrined bodies, and of course hear from the public, what are your thoughts on pensions? What are the models that you would like to see? Because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are going to be paying for it.
All right, interesting. Mr. Dale, I don't know if you want to chime in on this. Of course, interesting to hear what, of course, Ms. Mitchell mentioned it as relates to this in terms of the entities involved. What's your take on that in terms of what Ms. Ned mentioned?
Well,
you told me if anything that you would like to add to that.
There's not much. The directives in the Constitution are clear. Sections 2 of the Public Service Commission directs that no provision of a regulation shall be construed as to derogate from any provision of the Constitution. No provision. So the Public Service Rules and Regulations is subsidiary to the Constitution. And it says clearly that nothing here written is to derogate the authority of the Constitution. It cannot limit the authority of the Constitution. And the Constitution is, as identifies the Grenada Union of Teachers, and it was the Grenada Civil Service Association, which is now the Public Workers Association.
All right.
So those two entities, in addition, the Public Service Commission has a responsibility. And importantly, in the Public Service Commission, as the administrator, their role is an independent one. It's subject to the authority, it's subject to the control, of no person or authority. So there's nobody that is supposed to control the directives of the Public Service Commission. They're an independent authority. That independence is similar to the supervisor of elections in Sections 35 of the Constitution. It's similar to the Director of Public Prosecutions in Section 71 of the Constitution. And they're independent. And their independence has to be directed, has to be respected, Right. There are different roles for different people. In the Public Service Rules and Regulations, you'll see a role for the Prime Minister. You'll see roles for tribunals from the justices of the legal fraternity. You'll see roles for the Governor General. I should have probably put the role for the Governor General first. Mm-hmm. But those roles are all prescribed. And it tells you what to do, when to do.
No, the of course the newly proposed construct that's been proposed right now. What are some of the concerns that you have in relation to that in terms of pension?
The primary concern for us is that of accountability. As I said, pension is not a right. Yeah. The proposed pension is once you work XYZ time, you will get your pension at the ending of the period.
Yes.
In government, in the established framework of workers, your pension is dependent on you successfully completing your tenure. So that is a concern for us because it allows for accountability in the government, and we have campaigned over and over as citizens for accountability, a mechanism that makes us accountable. So that is a primary concern. The other concern is the direction that the public service is to take. We are not talking about 150 workers. We're not talking about 500 workers. We're talking about 3,500 workers. It means that at this point in time, the public service has in excess of 7,000 workers. There's been no efficiency survey, time and motion studies to find out whether this is working for us, if it is working, and if it is not working, why is it not working, before we go about the regularization. So regularization cannot just happen. You have to take into considerations what is the goal, what is the objective. And if the objective is just giving a pension, it's a noble one because, in my lifetime, I have seen people retire destitute and they can't provide for themselves. And as a national discussion, the whole issue of social security comes to the fore, If retirement you can't provide for yourself. There's no mechanism to support you.
Tell me, has your organization, I'm not sure if Ms. Mitchell or you has had any conversation with the authorities as relation to the concerns that you're having per se? Has any your group had any conversation with the authority as in relation to that? Anyone want to chime in on that?
I think Cassandra.
If I may address one concern that we have. The law to be applied to pensions must not be less favorable to that person. And that's according to the Constitution. We have heard concerns from the trade union presidents in regards to this proposed model. We are unclear as to how it is that our elected and selected officials are indicating that this is the best model for the public officer. When there are other concerns in regard to NHI, public officers are also mandated now to pay NIS. So if you look at the 3% to 6% gap or proposed gap that they're using, the model, it means that in addition to the almost 17%, because NIS is increasing slowly, in addition to the proposed NHI, which allegedly is also going to be mandatory. It means that for some public officers, almost 20% of their salaries are being deducted for benefits. Is it better for the person? And I'm using what the Constitution says because you're hearing the public officials indicating, oh, well, it's an investment. And it's good for them because you're investing in your future and in retirement. But when you look at the logic, is it really more favorable than the current law which exists? Because as Mr. Ned mentioned, the Constitution envisions a non-contributory pension scheme, and we interpret that also to be as an accountability mechanism as directed by the Public Service Rules and Regulations and the responsibilities of the commissioners of the Public Service Commission. So that is something that we have raised some concerns about. In regards to whether or not we have engaged authorities, precedents over the years have always been we have received email invites from permanent secretaries to attend sessions to provide feedback. It is interesting to note that for the last 29, 30 months, that while we have engaged some ministries, because some of us have been around for some time, and some of our permanent secretaries and senior public officers do invite us to consultations, this administration has not taken the liberty to bring civil society, grouping of civil society to the table to discuss national issues 30 months later. So, no, we have not really had discussions one-on-one with the Public Service Commission, because that's the constitutionally enshrined entity in regards to this proposed model. We have reached out to the unions, and we are pleased to publicly say, I hope they don't mind, that we did meet with the president and other representatives of the Public Workers Union to express our concerns and to listen to theirs about this proposed model. We have been trying to reach the Grenada Union of Teachers and other stakeholders to raise some of the concerns, constitutional concerns that we have, and legal implications as well. Because it's important, I don't know if Mr. Nell in here you mentioned this, that senior public officers are required to take an oath. And as part of the oath, an excerpt of the oath says that they will preserve, honor, and uphold the Constitution of Grenada. So when you have senior public officers sitting on public fora making comments that contradict the constitutional provisions, which they are supposed to be honoring and preserving, that is also a concern for a grouping of civil society and the caucus when we hear senior public officers making pronouncements like these. So we are open to engagement with any one of the entities. We thank the Public Workers Union for engaging us and for listening to our concerns, and we heard theirs. And we look forward to any other invites in regards to bringing our concerns around this proposed model to the table.
All right. Of course, we just have approximately about 10 more minutes left on today's program. We're going to invite some calls. Of course, there are sure individuals out there who may like to ask a question or two. Let's entertain our first caller. Caller, good morning in your life.
Thank you very much, Mr. Telesford, and good morning to your guest today, Brother Ned, Sister Mitchell. You know, when I hear you people talk this way and so on, it is evident that over the years, the Grenadian people have been extremely complacent and have allowed the demagogues that put themselves up as politicians and so on to just take over things and run it to suit them, defying the so-called Constitution in itself. Where did this thing start? And who did it? The amalgamation. Heard Brother Ned speak of separation of powers. We don't have that in this system. Because take a look, we elect people to run the legislature, make the laws, but the morning after they get an executive job to run the government and the purse strings of the country, so they own everything. No reason why we have to reconstitute this nation, but to the point. These people know what they're doing, and they introduced the vote 340 some years ago to bring in the assessors and the contractors and the this and that, and then they established the Department of Public Administration, totally defying and dismantling the Public Service Commission, which is a constitutional instrument. But we allowed it. I don't know why God didn't blind me before. But anyway, here, instead we can talk about it. Brothers and sisters, the only way we can change this is to reconstitute this nation. Let's do it. Let's call for a constituent assembly. You mentioned about the involvement of the people. The people are not involved with anything because the system has not been designed. You look at the Constitution. I know that you have read it over and over. It only speaks of what the state shall do, what should happen so that the state can operate. There is nothing within there for the people. The people doesn't have any involvement in anything. So it's what they say. And that's what the others say. You understand? So they grab on to the quote-unquote power, but the power of a country, the sovereign and constituent power of a country, resides non-transferably in the hands of the people. We have to do. Let's tell these people once and for all and demand of them that we must have a constituent assembly to revamp. I'm happy that some code in recent times been saying it. Revoke and revamp the constitution of this country. But thank you for your contributions and thank you for enlightening the people on this thing. The only way we can correct this is to correct it. Thank you very much for what is worth. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Thank you so much for your contribution this morning. We do have another caller. I'm not sure if you want to revert to anything that the caller mentioned, or we just entertain another call. Let's go to another call. Caller, good morning. You're live. Caller via WhatsApp.
Hey, good morning, JT. JT, I heard those people speaking about the 1959 Constitution on the pension thing. So what happened to the NIS? So the NIS will be non-existent. Only for if you have pension scheme. Further to bring forth.
Caller, for some reason or the other, it's not getting you clearly coming in your contribution. We apologize for that, but I guess it's due to your connection.
But I think he was making reference to the pensions, the NIS, and whether the NIS would be applicable. The NIS was established as an act of parliament.
Yes.
Okay. Now, even in its existence as the NIS, any act of parliament must be consistent with the Constitution.
Yes.
So we have to apply that. The NIS has to have constitutional authority for whatever it's doing. So there is a difference between the pension that the NIS is providing, because the NIS is providing pensions for both public workers and private workers, private sector workers at this point in time. So that pension is not the pension that is described in the Constitution. The pension that is described in the Constitution is a non-contributory pension, and that is specifically for established positions in the public service.
Okay, we do have another caller. Caller, good morning, you're live.
Hello, good morning. I think sir, what needs to be done? There needs to be a national conversation on the pension that is proposed, Okay, I'm disappointed because while this current administration was in opposition, they talk about the people being ostracized on sensitive issues. The masses have no say. And look what they have done. They are practicing what they have condemned. I do support a contributory pension. We have to take into consideration our country is poor. Okay, and it is not sustainable. But for heaven's sake, have a national discussion. Why the fear? This should have been done. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you so much, caller. I have a comment from someone via the WhatsApp. They're saying to, of course, Mr. Neda, this is Mitchell. What's a solution you propose since the sustainability of the old pension has been an issue since 1973? What do you propose?
We don't know that. There's been no report, there's been no investigation, decisive investigation into the situation as it exists today. And that is what we're asking for. We have a situation that has evolved over the 50 years of our independence where, and Brother Rollo allowed it, we have allowed politicians to go outside of the rules and regulations and establish a vote 340 that now vote 340 was initially for temporary workers, temporary cleaners, and you have an emergency here or there, and you have to get extra workers to assist the established workers. That was vote 340. Vote 340 now is an established section in the Ministry of Finance, and they cater for over 3,500 workers, and we have to address that issue in a non-partisan way. Is it working for us or is it not working for us? And it's only when we have that national conversation that most people have been calling for now, you hear people talking of, that we can discuss these issues outside of the political arena, outside of the partisan political arena.
My question now is that what's the way forward for this now? What's the way forward?
I would hope that the authorities would listen, that the authorities would go back to what the constitutional duties are and have discussions with the people, have discussions with the appropriate entities, because we're going ahead with a pension that involves unions, and the unions are saying that, they're not a part of it. So how do you do that? In a democratic society, that is just unheard of. So I would hope that the authorities would listen, that they would open the discussion, open a genuine discussion, and not try having stopgap measures to address issues that are all-encompassing and requires the national input.
Let's take our final call, and then we, of course, come and get some closing contribution from you both. Caller, good morning, and you're live.
Good morning, and morning to two guests. I'm disappointed in Mr. Ned and Ms. Mitchell. You all have been with this thing for a long time. You know who I am. You know my voice very well. Sometimes we talk about being not political, but we are very political. Yes? My suggestion to you, one of them, to your grouping, come up with an alternative proposal to the government. The government has a responsibility in governance to come up with something, because the present situation as it is, you can't send home those 3,000 plus workers. Yes? They were not responsible for being hired. The government of the day then, those governments employ those people. So we cannot send them home. Additionally, the present construct of the pension cannot be sustained. And Mr. Ned, you know that very well. Which other country could you point to me that has a pension scheme, even where this constitution came from? It is not applicable. It is not there. Everyone pays a contributory pension. They have imposed this thing on us. A poor country, we ain't have no gas, we ain't have no oil, we have no mineral, and it is my money, our money, that is paying this pension. How do you explain to me someone who is paying taxes in the private sector, some of them leaving their job without a pension, and they are contributing to a lofty pension of those people who are working in the public sector? These things have to be done. Something has to be done about it. And let me tell you something. I have always advocated public discussion. But what we need in this thing is a concentrated discussion. There are some unions, the unions, in my view, they are just playing deep political and they are concerned about themselves, what they are getting from the workers. And they are not actually concerned about those workers themselves. Because to me, they would have been coming up with alternative suggestions to the government. They are not even going to the discussions based on news that is coming from the public service. So, to me, let me say this. Let me say that in closing. There are some people out there, if you go to them, they would not be able to contribute to this discussion because they have no knowledge of it. They don't have an understanding of what is happening. Yes? So maybe your group, and when you are discounting the fact that you are considering those people as public officers and whatever, the Constitution has to be amended in order to facilitate these people. And yes, some of them will suffer. It has to start somewhere for at the end of the day, they themselves could go home with something as a pension. So if you don't satisfy with what the government is proposing, my suggestion to you as a civil society group, come up with an alternative suggestion. Come up with something. Give the government something to think about. The union can do the same thing. Independent people can do the same thing. Give them alternative suggestions. Instead of criticizing, you can't do this, you cannot do this, and you'll be doing this, you'll be doing that, and you're making no alternative suggestion of value. Thank you and have a good morning.
Thank you, caller. Thank you for your contribution this morning. I'm not sure if I want to have a response to the caller.
Of course. The caller has said a lot. He's spoken about constitutional directives. He's spoken about amending the Constitution. If we were to take his last statement with regards to amendment of the Constitution to facilitate the actions of the government now, I think that Ms. Mitchell spoke about it earlier when she said that all members of the executive all take an oath to honor, to respect, to preserve the Grenada Constitution. So if the actions that they are taking now is outside of the Constitution, as the caller is articulating, and he's saying that we should amend the Constitution to facilitate those actions, then clearly it requires the national conversation that we're talking about. The Constitution cannot be amended outside of prescribed recommendations, prescribed sections in the Constitution. You have to go to a referendum to amend the Constitution. And that is what we're talking about. Okay. It is difficult to ascribe partisan political responsibility to the grouping. This morning we have quoted from the Public Service Rules and Regulations. We've quoted the Constitution of Grenada. Yeah. And that's it. So everything both of us would have articulated this morning can be referred to. It can be found in these two documents. Right. So these are not apolitical documents. They're not partisan in any way.
All right, well, Mr. Hilbert, this is what we had to take a wrap for today. We have gone over time just a wee bit, but this is what we had to take a wrap for today's program. I want to thank you so much. I'm not sure if you have anything in closing before we
Of course, we want to thank GBN for giving us this opportunity. It's always has been a good relationship with the GBN, and we want to thank them for the part that they're playing in educating the nation on these hard topics. These are topics that are not necessarily easy to digest, but they are topics that actually need ventilating, that the nation must come to some consensus around. And that's the only time that we're going to go forward. We're not going to go forward in a partisan mechanism where one entity is pulling this way, another one is pulling this way. For us to make progress in Grenada, we must come together as a people.
All right, thank you so much. Once again, Mr. Ned, I want to dthank you. Of course, we have lost Ms. Mitchell through the connection purpose, so we have lost her. But I want to thank both of you for being on the program this morning. Maybe on another occasion we could have you again when we have more time, that we could, of course, expand on this a whole lot. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you so much.
Hey, folks, that's where we take a wrap for this edition of To The Point for today, Friday, the 8th day of November. Join us again for another edition. That's where we say goodbye.